Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our Monday Night Football preview for tonight's showdown in prop slate to get you ready for all of the action. You got the Buccaneers, the Chiefs going head-to-head, and some nasty weather expected for tonight's game. So I'm going to have some curveballs for you, a few different ways you might want to handle that kind of sloppy slate, and how we can go out there, generate an edge out there in our showdown lineups, a few ways you can go out there, get some leverage out there in GPPs, and then towards the end of this video is where we're going to focus on the prop side of things. There were some of our underdog and prize picks exposure. So a lot to go through here. It's not waste any time at all. But first off, a look at the showdown side of things and how I'm approaching the sloppy weather game. Before we start talking the specifics of how to handle a nasty weather game, we've got to start off with an injury report and then a look at some of the ownership too. So first off with the injury report, we've got 3 players as questionable on the offensive side. That would be a Bucky Irving, who is expected to play tonight. Jalen McMillan, also wide receiver for the Buccaneers. Sterling Shepard, a little bit banged up. Those 2 wide receivers, maybe the more interesting injuries heading into lock. As I already told you, they're expecting Irving to play, but there's a little bit more question behind a McMillan and a Shepard. So if either or both of those were to be out, you'd have a lot of cheaper wide receivers on the Bucs that you could get to. So you already got Trey Palmer, who we'll talk about later, at $4,000, but players like Raheem Jarrett or even a Ryan Miller down here at $1,000 would become viable options if either of those 2 were out. So that's it from the injury perspective. Then when we talk about ownership, it is going to be clearly centered around the Kansas City Chiefs. They're 8-9 point favorites depending on what sportsbook you're looking at, and anytime you have a massive spread like that, you're going to see the general public get behind that sentiment. And anytime you've got a sloppy weather game like this, those defenses, those running backs are going to be higher owned by default. So players like a Kareem Hunt, Chiefs defense down here at $5,000 are likely going to go up in ownership as the day goes on. So right now you can see like the Chiefs are about 23%. I've got Kareem Hunt at about 54% ownership. By the time we get to my 3rd, 4th run of ownership by the end of the day, he's likely going to be well over the 60% mark. So just know that the Chiefs are going to be by far the more popular option. And whether you're playing more Chiefs players in lineups going with a 4-2, a 5-1 stack towards Kansas City, that's likely what a lot of the field is going to be doing. So if you agree with that kind of build, perhaps stay away from some of the larger field GPPs. Try and find a contest that's maybe a little bit smaller. We don't have to worry about the ownership nearly as much to cater towards that kind of lineup. So, heading into lock, you should always kind of have a game plan or an idea of the kind of lineups that you're looking to build. And I think in the large field GPPs, the best way to go out here and build for today would either be a balanced lineup, which I still think is going to be relatively popular. 3-3s are always going to get played out there in GPPs. But if you went with a 4-2 Buck stack, let's say that you had the stones to go out there and play 4 guys out there from the 8-9 point underdogs, you're going to be vastly underowned compared to the rest of the industry. So large field GPPs, I think if you're trying to play the game theory edge, trying to go out there, play the game a little bit, you go out there, maybe take a Bucks heavy approach. Outside of that though, my single entries, some of my smaller field stuff, is going to be on that chalkier Chiefs side. I tend to agree with them as being solid favorites. You just have so many injuries over there on the Bucks to overcome, whether it's Mike Evans, whether it's players like Chris Godwin that are out for quite some time. That's going to be tough to beat a team that's already been on a roll. So I don't think that you have to avoid the Chiefs by any means, but just maybe do it in the right contest, right? If you're going to play the chalkier lineups like I'm probably going to be doing in a lot of cases, well, I'm going to keep them out of the big 20 or big $5 GPPs. Now let's go player by player and give you an idea how to attack this kind of weather slate, because it adjusts projections. In fact, I had to take my baseline projections out here for this evening and completely retool them a little bit for the kind of weather that we're expecting. If you haven't already seen it, I'm not going to bring up the weather forecast here on live stream, as you'll probably see it like 5-6 times on Twitter before lock tonight, and it's going to change quite a bit as we get closer to lock as well. But as of right now, there's a consistent rain starting around 7 p.m. local time over there. Coincidentally, they're starting around 7:15 local time, so that is about the worst case scenario for that rain to be coming through, and a lot of the heavy rain is going to be during that first half. So expect to see a solid amount of rain. They said like half an inch an hour out there for the first 2-3 hours, and while there are going to be periods of dry weather like some of the meteorologists are calling for, it's going to have that same kind of washout effect like we had there with the Packers-Lions. And while it might not be as drastic as what we had in that game where there was nearly no passing to go around, I think it's going to impact guys like Mahomes. Like, for example, he was closer to a 22-point projection for me. Now he's only at 20.4 points. Kareem Hunt here went up from like a 15.8-point projection to there at about 17 points. So if you're not adjusting your projections to account for that weather, then I think you're making a pretty massive mistake tonight. So I'll still have some Mahomes, but he's nearly 82% owned in a bad weather game. He's also about $10,000. So I think you can make a huge argument for fading him out there tonight. Now, if you're playing Kansas City led lineups, it's going to be really hard to go out there and completely fade Patrick Mahomes. But, especially in those large field GPPs, there's a scenario where it's still like a 4-2 Chiefs lineup that gets there, and Patrick Mahomes isn't in it because he is so expensive, and quarterbacks have a hard time getting there in these sloppy weather games. Kareem Hunt, on the other hand, if you're going to take that chalky Kansas City approach, even if he's going to be 60-65% owned by the time we get to lock, he's probably going to be your best bet over there for Kansas City. He's going to see a ton of targets, a ton of rushes out of the backfield out there for the Chiefs, as that's usually how you go out there and win these sloppy weather games, particularly when you're playing from ahead. If you're playing from a touchdown or two ahead, you don't want to risk having a lot of turnovers, and the best way to avoid that is to take the air out of the football and try and avoid all of those mistakes where you can. So I would expect Kareem Hunt to maybe even have 20 plus rushes tonight. I've got him scoring at least one touchdown as well in my projection. So $9,800, a 17-point projection. That is going to be one of my favorite, if not my entire favorite play on the entire slate. Next up, I got Baker Mayfield. He's $9,600. He's missing his top two weapons, but if they're going to be playing from 8-9 points behind, they're still going to have to pass a little bit. So if you were going to take one of these two quarterbacks, particularly if you think the Chiefs roll a little bit tonight, I would much rather have a Baker Mayfield because, if you're playing from behind, you kind of have to pass the ball. You saw that out there from Jordan Love in that bad weather game yesterday, and he still had well over 200 yards passing. So it's not like it's impossible for one of these quarterbacks to get there. It's just that you have to be careful about deploying them. And I think if you're going to play that Kansas City led lineup like I am in most cases, a Baker Mayfield would make a lot of sense if you're going to take one of those two quarterbacks up top. Not that you have to have one of the two quarterbacks. A lot of times on a showdown slate, I make a roll to play at least one of the two out there in every single lineup. This is not the kind of slate where I'd be doing that at all. In fact, I'm 100% going to have lineups that don't have one of those two in there. Travis Kelce is $8,800. I would say a pretty mediocre play by almost every single metric. With the weather, we're not expecting him to get like 10, 11 targets or anything like that. But because he is a tight end, because he is more of a zone killer sort of player, I like that in this sort of weather. He's going to try and find the soft spot of the defense. If they end up playing man coverage, it's really tough to cover in man out there when you're playing in this kind of game. So expect to see a lot of zone coverage. And a player like Travis Kelce is infamous for taking advantage of zone coverage. So $8,800, he's not my favorite play because of the weather situation, but he does have some stuff going for him, particularly with all the injuries that they've had on that offense. He's been the number one guy the last few weeks, even with DeAndre Hopkins in the fold now. Cade Otton has looked like a completely different player ever since those top two players went out. He's turned into their pseudo number one wide receiver. And while I think $8,400 is way too expensive, his reception line is at 4.5 on books, and it is minus 200 for the over. So implying just under a 60% hit rate, actually 66% hit rate out there for Cade Otton is pretty crazy stuff. If he's getting 5+ catches, he's getting us 40-50 yards. That is 10 fantasy points right there. He ends up scoring a touchdown. That's how you get that ceiling performance out of Un. So though he's expensive, I think in GPPs, especially the larger field stuff, because he's a little bit lower owned than Kelce, he's not that much far off than guys like a Xavier Worthy or a Rashad White. It's not like he's getting you leverage at $8,400, but he's also not a piece of chalk that you're taking in that range either. Xavier Worthy, these kind of fast, gadget sort of players, I really don't like when you have this weather kind of situation. I will say, though, with his speed, if he can make one of those guys fall on defense when you have that man coverage, that could turn into a touchdown for Xavier Worthy, but I would rather have these zone killers like Travis Kelce on that kind of situation. Rashad White, by the way, if Bucky Irving were to, for some reason, be out tonight, Rashad White would be the best play on the slate, bar none. They're at $7,400. But if both are playing, both are just decent plays out there in GPPs. If the Buccaneers are going to go out there and play from ahead, maybe a play slightly more Bucky Irving. If they're playing from behind and are taking more of a passing-heavy approach, then maybe a play more Rashad White, as his reception line is up there at 3.5 on books and juiced over, while Bucky Irving is down at 2.5 and about even money. So, if you look at the numbers for the year, Rachaad White has been the more productive back in terms of receptions out of the backfield. So just, I think, pick the right running back out there for the Buccaneers based on the script that you're playing. You're playing a Kansas City-led lineup. Maybe that's where you go and take a Rachaad White. You're taking a gamble out there on the Bucs. Well, Bucky Irving could be a piece of leverage. They're just 26.6% combined ownership and also fits that mold, fits that game script just a little bit better. New man in town, DeAndre Hopkins, $7,000. I think that he's going to see some snaps. I haven't heard anything about any sort of limitation out there tonight, but the weather isn't great. So he's $7,000. I think a very reasonable price tag considering the kind of usage that he's going to see, but not my favorite play just because of the weather. You've got Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, solid values here in this mid-tier range. They're going to be the number 1, number 2 wide receivers out there for the Bucs, and because I haven't watched every single game for the Bucs, I can't really tell you who's going to be number 1 and number 2. So I've got Jalen McMillan projecting just a little bit better than Sterling Shepard, mostly because of the sportsbook lines are slightly favoring the Jalen McMillan over there, but I think that both are decent options, not great, but the one thing about Sterling Shepard that could be attractive is that he's only about 11.6% owned there between flex and captain. So if McMillan is truly going to be 2.5 times higher owned than a player that I have just projected 0.8 points lower, 1.2 points lower, I was looking at the wrong projections there, then yeah, Sterling Shepard is going to be in my player pool and is going to be a piece of leverage I'm using over there on Tampa Bay. These kickers tend to have a rough go when you have these rainy, windy conditions. It's more so rain tonight than the wind that you saw with the Packers-Lions, so I don't think that the kickers are unplayable by any means, but definitely saw a slight downtick in projection after we got that weather forecast. These defenses, on the other hand, could be absolute gold. Not only are we going to have a slightly lower scoring game if it is weather impacted like we expect, but you're also going to have more turnovers happening. You're going to have that wet football, whether it's fumbles, whether it's potential interceptions, more sacks, all of that, right, comes into play when you have these wet, sloppy conditions. So the Chiefs are going to be popular. I would expect them to be at least 30% by the time we get to lock, with people looking at the weather, starting to adjust for that out there in their builds. The Buccaneers defense, though, I've got them at about 11% right now. They're going to max out at about maybe 15% by the time that we get to lock. So, I think the Chiefs might not be that big piece of a leverage, right? They're going to get some ownership out there, but if you're looking to get different, the Buccaneers could do that for you. Trey Palmer at $4,000. It would be either the number 1, 2, or 3 wide receiver out there for the Bucs. Once again, I can't really even call him their wide receiver 3 because he's projecting 0.5 points lower out there than their wide receiver 2. So they're pretty interchangeable. And considering that Trey Palmer is only about 20% owned, he's also only $4,000. They're all worth mixing in. I think they're all worth a flyer 2 or play out there in GPPs. But because of the weather, you don't feel great about any of those sort of players. Justin Watson has that big body, that size to go out there, maybe score a red zone touchdown. In these kind of conditions, you're still going to see some shots down there in the red zone, fades out there in the red zone. So Justin Watson could get there that way. Noah Gray, big body, zone killer like you have there with Travis Kelce. I don't think it's the worst idea either. I would rather have these Justin Watsons, these Noah Grays, than Xavier Worley, for example. Who Worley, he depends on making those cuts, that speed to go out there in post-production. Not so much with Watson Gray, right? These are two big body guys that aren't blowing you away by any means with their speed. These are the kind of guys that can still get it done in these kind of conditions. Sean Tucker, don't sleep on him. He has been extremely productive when he's gone the football. If this happens to be some kind of blowout out there for the Chiefs, maybe Sean Tucker plays out there in the second half. Carson Steele has lost a lot of his usage for the Chiefs, but is still in play out there for some, second, maybe third string running back usage out there for the Kansas City Chiefs. Issue is, he's not really going to be that third down back, not the best receiver out of the backfield. That's going to be all Perrine, maybe a little bit of Kareem Hunt mixed in. Carson Steele is only going to see snaps out there on first and second down, and they've been using a ton of Kareem Hunt. So if you're in a large field GPP, maybe you take a shot or two on a Carson Steele, but that's about it. And then the last 2 wide receivers down here, this would be Jarrett and then Miller. I have no idea how much these 2 are going to play. In fact, I have almost no confidence in them, only about a 2-point projection on either case. But if for some reason we had McMillan or Sterling Shepard rolled out, that would completely change that situation. It would make these kind of players a little bit more viable. Would take them from about a 2-point projection up there to 4 or 5 fantasy points. And you're going to want to make sure that they're active out there before lock as well. So make sure you're keeping an eye out there on the Bucs inactives list. Obviously, if they're inactive, don't use them out there tonight. But if they are, maybe worth a flyer or two out there in GPP. And now for the prop side of things, where we'll go through a few props that I've already entered that you might want to keep an eye on yourself. So first prop is going to be an over on Baker Mayfield passing attempts, who of course they're 8-9 point underdogs against the Kansas City Chiefs and are likely going to have to pass the ball a lot this evening. The only issue I have with this is the fact that it is going to be a sloppy weather game, but you saw guys like Jordan Love still have to pass the ball a ton in the rainy conditions playing from behind. So I don't think it's going to be like a game where it's all runs out there from both teams. And if there's a team that's going to have to pass the ball a little bit more, it would be the Buccaneers. So even with the weather, that's been accounted for in a lot of these projections. He's minus 140 for his over on FanDuel at this number. And then on Draftkings, he is minus 145 for the over the last time that I checked. So though it is 0.94x out there for the multiplier, it was something that I mixed in. Personally, I mixed it in with this Kareem Hunt over on rushing attempts. So I know on here we have the rushing yard prop. Unfortunately, that one ended up getting moved on us. So I got him at 16.5 rushing attempts, and he was actually juiced towards the over. He had a it was a 1.06x multiplier towards the over, which made absolutely no sense. Sometimes Underdog gets caught with their pants down out there on certain props. I'm not going to give away too much because I don't want them to know what to fix out there with their algorithm, but that was one example of them getting caught with their pants down, because not only did we have that one rushing attempt difference, but also we had the multiplier towards the thing that was juiced towards the over there in other books. Just to give you an example, on FanDuel, he was at 17.5 rushing attempts. On DraftKings, he was at 17.5 rushing attempts. He was even money, and we were getting 16.5 and a boosted payout towards the over. So that was really solid. Unfortunately, they took that off the board. So, I post that to my Patreon members. They're able to get that value as soon as it drops. Unfortunately, sometimes that's going to move the props because of how much money is going in on them. But if you wanted to find a replacement out there for that, I am not against this over on rushing yards whatsoever, because it's the same idea. I'm expecting the Kansas City Chiefs to run the ball a whole lot playing from ahead, especially when you have these rainy conditions present. What you saw from the Lions, I think they're a very good case example for what we're going to see tonight, is the Lions are playing from ahead the entire game out there yesterday afternoon. I had an over on Jared Goff passing yards, which got completely screwed because of this. So this is why I was watching this so much. I was tracking some of the props I was playing, and yeah, they hardly even passed the ball in the second half, right? If you're playing from ahead, if you have that rain coming down, why risk a ball slipping out of your hand? Why risk a snap from shotgun going through your hands, that kind of thing, and having a turnover? They just ran the ball with Gibbs and Montgomery the entire time. So you can see that one actually bumped up 1 yard there. If you wanted to take it over here in Prize Picks, I already had it up as a little bit of a backup. We have them at 63.5 over there, so you can still take them at that number. Then the Baker Mayfield prop, it is 0.5 higher, but you would get actually about the same payout over here on this site. So the unfortunate part is that there's a little bit of correlation between these two. So I would still play it over here in Underdog if you can, because the payout is a little bit higher, and you're taking the prop 0.5 lower in terms of that passing attempt. So the reason for that, by the way, if this didn't have a multiplier, this would probably pay even lower than this point on 2.82x because of the correlation rules. But again, I don't want to give away too much about their algorithm, but when you have a multiplier, it's like the correlation rules don't exist. So I don't want to say too much about that, because again, I don't want them to fix some of these issues that they've had for quite some time on their platform. And depending on the way that you pair these together, sometimes you can find better payouts than what you should probably be getting. So whether it's over there on Underdog, Prize Picks, maybe these move around. Obviously, do your line shopping, find the best spots. Those are definitely two props that I like out there for this evening. Team that is 8-9 point favorites going out there and passing a little bit more. Then on the flip side, the team that is the 8-9 point favorites going out there and running the ball, playing from ahead. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button, and also comment down below who you've got as your top fantasy scorer for tonight for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. To go out there and win, you will have to get that top score and their fantasy projection within 2 fantasy points. So go ahead, claim your player down below and their projection, and best of luck out there with all of your exposure this evening. Of course, if you go out there and get that Patreon page, you will get access to all of the content you see throughout my videos. That will include the spreadsheets with all the DFS projections that you saw on there before, has my player pool, stack info, player note info for every single player out there playing tonight, as well as all the prop stuff that I'm going with as well. So if you want to see exactly what I'm taking on Underdog and Prize Picks before anything bumps, to get all of the value as soon as it's dropping, make sure to go over there, join the Patreon page, become a member of the community, and go out there and reap all the benefits. But that's all I've got out there for this evening. Best of luck out there with everything that you guys are going with. Hopefully you can take down a GPP or two, cash out on our prop slip, and let's have a good one.